Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world that you're watching from. And welcome to this World Water Week's talk show, which will be all about stacked benefits. So, inclusion, stewardship, and cooperation for water security. It's so lovely to have you tuning in here today with us, whether it's from home or from work, watching online. And also, I would say a very warm welcome to the people here in Stockholm that are live with us in the room. My name is Hajar Yacoubi, and I have the honor of being your moderator for these upcoming 20 minutes as we'll dive into a topic that is crucial when we talk about making sure that we can achieve SDG 6. So in this session specifically, we will be focusing much more on the critical role of inclusion, meaningful inclusion that can really drive progress forward when we talk about all the obstacles that we need to overcome when it comes to achieving sustainable water management systems. So we'll discuss the broader impact of inclusive practices and also shaping all the action regarding the future to 2030, but also beyond it with the challenges that we have. So I would say no pressure to my panel because that is quite an important task to do, but I am luckily joined by a stellar panel full of expertise. So a very warm welcome to you. First off, I'd say a very warm welcome to you, Patricia Fuller, the President and CEO of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. It's very happy and good to have you here with us. Then we're also joined by Kaveh Madani. You are the director of the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. Very warm welcome to you as well. Now, I already mentioned a little bit about the topic, but maybe, Patricia, I can start with you. Can you maybe help us understand, before we dive into the depths of the specificness here, what prompted you to sort of decide on this specific topic? What's the relevance and the urgency here?
Certainly, Hajar, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you on this panel and with Kaveh. So I think in the corridors of World Water Week, we're hearing a lot about inclusion, and we all know it's very important. We all know if we look at the water action agenda that emerged from the 2023 conference and the 800 action items that flowed from that, and the imperative of accelerating progress on SDG 6, as you referenced. I think we all know that inclusion of stakeholders, communities, Indigenous peoples is critical to accelerating that progress.
Yeah.
But it's to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in practice that we thought would be, at least for me, an opportunity to do in this discussion.
Right, so it's not just about inclusion, but about meaningful inclusion. What does that look like? Equitable. Thank you so much. I mean, Kaveh, if you hear that, is that something that resonates? Would you have anything to add to that? Why inclusion specifically?
Absolutely. I think we keep hearing about this important word in the 21st century, and it's this is fortunate that we finally hear about the need for that. But I'm here to, I think, remind ourselves and the community out there that this is not just a luxury term. It's not something nice to be done, but the gateway to the change, an essential step, an essential requirement for getting the solution right. Unless we get into inclusion, unless we really implement inclusion, we don't understand the differences, the barriers, the diversity
Right.
of problems, local knowledge, etc.
Yeah, so not a nice to have indeed, but it's a crucial part of the foundation on which we need to build further. Maybe I want to dive into that further because we're sort of already tapping into it when we say it can be a buzzword, inclusion, and then how do we make it equitable and meaningful? If we look at that definition, I mean, what can you maybe help us understand what inclusion looks like in practice? Like, what does it mean when we say that? Patricia, would you like to go first?
Yes, certainly. So it's a big topic because solving the water security crisis involves so many different areas for action.
Right.
In our institution, in the International Institute for Sustainable Development, as our name suggests, we work in a broad range of areas, but there's two areas which relate most directly to water, and I think they're they're part of the kind of you can say value chain of action, in the sense of starting with the science, and we have a freshwater research facility doing work on freshwater science, and then we are engaged in more of the kind of policy space, as well as implementation of nature-based solutions for improving water security. So in the science area and in the implementation area, what I can tell you about are just how we're moving to increase the inclusiveness of our work. And in our scientific area, the Experimental Lakes Area in northern Ontario, it's on Treaty 3 territory. So the Treaty 3 nations are, of course, key partners in the work we do there, and have been for some time. But we are finding that the key really around inclusion is responding to their priorities. Of course, they're interested to be engaged in the scientific work we're doing. They're interested to be advisors on this work. But they also have their own priorities that they can see we can help them to further those priorities. So, for example, we're working on a wild rice project, which for them, that's about food security, about traditional way of life. But it's also a crop which has significant environmental impacts, including on water quality. So this project is about working to find innovative ways to reduce those impacts and enable more wild rice cultivation. So that's responding to a priority that they've expressed in co-developing that project with them. This same scientific work has a partnership also with the African Great Lakes, and there our inclusion focus is really around gender. So we have a program which enables African women scientists to come to Canada and to engage in a year-long leadership training, mentoring program. They're not in Canada for a year, I should hasten to add, just a short while, and in the summer. But that has really enabled them to be stronger voices in their discussions around the Great Lakes area in Africa, and that plays a very critical role, of course, in water security in Africa.
But it's quite interesting. The red thread sort of through those two examples is also taking a back seat and listening in from the knowledge that local communities are able to bring. And I mean, it sounds so obvious. Of course you would do that. But so often we have this sort of like bringing something from the outside in perspective and imposing an idea, and then this is the way in which it would work. So I also hear I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think there's something to be said about a certain humility and leadership there that you can imply to make sure that works. Thank you so much. Kaveh, do you have anything to add to sort of that question of, inclusion in practice, examples that we have there?
So from the UNU standpoint, of course, I think if you're real about inclusion, wherever we are and in whatever organization we are, we have to make that part of our DNA, right? So in terms of who are the community of we have in our system is, and in the type of actions we undertake. And I think UNU, United Nations University, is involved in 3 pillars of activity, and in all of those we try to stand by inclusion and make that a priority. When it comes to research, we have been trying to highlight the problems, the inequity problems, not only in the global south that we keep talking about, but also in the global north. So we have published on the gendered impact of lack of high quality water and good sanitation, but also the inequity behind the levees in the United States, to remind the larger community that we see these issues everywhere in the world. This is not only a global south problem. When it comes to capacity building, we are working with a lot of nations. We provide online and open access education to combat with the digital divide. Thousands of students are taking those courses, including many young women. But also we go to nations, we listen to what they tell us what they need, and we try to facilitate essentially and make arrangements for connecting them to the instructors and those who are willing to share their knowledge for free. And then the third pillar of activity for us is outreach and policy. So we work with more than 60 nations in the global south on tracking their progress toward SDG 6. And they're the ones actually who told us about their needs, what sort of information they need to track, what sort of gaps they have. And over the years, we have had a tool that was co-developed with them. And they're the ones who are tracking and then also communicating to their government what's missing. So it is a fun journey for us, and we learn. We learn a lot, and that's a requirement.
Yeah. But I maybe I want to dive into that a bit deeper. Not maybe, I want to dive into that deeper because you're speaking a bit about the impact then, right? So I mean, the general premise here is how can we be meaningfully inclusive, equitably inclusive? And then you say, hey, because they're able to do this tracking and we can support that in whichever capacity you do. And then you see that they're able to hold their governments to account. And that's sort of the impact that then, is an outcome of taking the effort to imply these practices of inclusion. Can the both of you maybe speak to that more? Because we've heard some incredible examples, whether it's about local indigenous communities or whether it's about, these young African female scientists that came over, the impact, so to say, of these examples.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think in the case of this project that is aiming to increase the participation of African women scientists in the whole set of discussions around the African Great Lakes, what we've seen as a result of this program, which we implement in partnership with the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education, is that 30 of the graduates of this program have gone on to be members of advisory groups for the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. And there's a woman leading the advisory group for Lake Kivu, for example. So that's really directly addressing what is a real underrepresentation of women's voices in these discussions. And I think, we all know that better representation of women in any kind of discussion leads to better results, to have that gender equality reflected. So that's certainly where we've seen a direct impact, and then. I didn't speak about some of the work we're doing on the Canadian prairies, where the theme of inclusion is really around reaching to smaller communities, rural communities, around nature-based solutions for water security. So these are things like water retention ponds that aim to increase water security, or floating treatment wetlands, which is an innovative approach to improving water quality. And there, the impact of these solutions, which of course are affordable. They're more affordable than kind of gray infrastructure solutions. They're not an entire solution, but they certainly can help, and at a cost which is more affordable for smaller communities. And so we're seeing that leads to a direct impact in terms of communities seeing that there is a way that they can affordably address water quality and water security.
That's amazing. Thank you also for sharing that. Kaveh, do you want to speak to the impact?
Yeah. So of course, impact is a long-term thing. So it is very hard to measure what's going to happen in short term. But we are so lucky to see also many of those short-term impacts, including some, I would say, unintended positive impacts.
Tell me about that.
So they come out of the process. One of those, I think, is when we were planning lots of projects, we didn't think of ourselves as the primary beneficiary of those engagements, and that's learning.
Yeah.
learning about the wrong perceptions of the problems. Like you interact with people and then you realize what's missing.
Yeah.
You interact with indigenous communities, with marginalized communities, and all of a sudden you feel so ignorant about what's happening, or about the lack of knowledge about their valuable knowledge. So one is also like being the educator of the
Right.
scientific community here, the scientists who are in their ivory towers and don't get to see the reality. So that's one of the, I would say, highlights there. But we also, whenever you do education, there are statistics to be proud of, right?
Yeah.
So over the last 2 months, more than 150 students have graduated from our workshops on climate and flood modeling in Africa.
I mean, I
in
was going to
person.
say, when you talk about long-term impacts, like the element of education, that's like the thing that's going to have a ripple effect for time to come.
Yes, and then we're working with different communities right now in the global south in preparation of the UNCCD Cup in December, and they're submitting case studies to tell us about what they have implemented, nature-based solutions, cheap actions, and but we're highlighting the benefit, the long-term economic benefits of those, to encourage other nations to learn from them and adopt those.
Yeah.
So I think the list of positive impacts are unlimited. But it is, I like the fact that we learn, we get energized, and then we continue. So it's a positive reinforcement that inclusion brings to your work, and inclusion means better impact and better impact. More, so it's a fascinating process.
For sure, and I love that mutual sort of like realization that how much you get back from it as well. And if anything, maybe you end up being the main beneficiary in that way, because what's more valuable than learning? In that sense. We're almost approaching the end of the talk show, so I wanted to ask you this next question, which is all to do with the recommendations, right? So people might be listening in and they may be thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I do within my respective organization? So if you were to speak to the recommendations that you would have for people that want to make sure that they ingrain inclusion better within their systems, what would you say to that briefly?
I think basically that wherever you're working at on this challenge of water, whether like we are at the basic science point, or whether you're working on policy, or whether you're working on implementation of solutions on the ground, there are always valuable opportunities for increasing inclusion in those efforts, and they will always lead to better results. It really very much is, as Kaveh's just said, a mutually beneficial experience. In fact, I forgot to mention that this slide that we have up on the screen shows it illustrates the two examples I talked about of the engagement with local Indigenous communities. So you see the Indigenous elder carrying out a ceremony which thanks the water. It's important in the spirituality of Indigenous nations to thank the water for what it brings to us. And you see the African women scientists who are visiting our experimental lakes area, participating in that ceremony. So it really has been rewarding for us to have these opportunities to engage with what have been underrepresented voices in this space.
I love that so much. Thanks for pointing that out. I hadn't realized it yet, but that's amazing to see. And it's an amazing example. Kaveh, if you would speak to what you hope people take away from this as a recommendation?
I think I think the first thing is kind of repetition of what you say. Wherever you are, whatever you do, you can make a contribution to inclusion. Understand the value of it, and do whatever you can to contribute to this essentially good cause. Understand that inclusion must not be reduced to just the skin color or even the gender issue. It's much broader. It's about understanding the diversities across communities, the problems around the world, the needs, the resources, the knowledges, and so on. We also need diversity in narratives, and that can be, I think, that's something for all of us to understand. The narratives sometimes about the problems and the nature of the problems are are dominated by the voices of the global north.
Yeah.
We need, when we talk about real inclusion, we need to let those people speak up, and we have to empower that. And I think at least our two organizations are blessed with having a role in that and playing a major role there. We have the blueprint. We know what we need to achieve the SDGs. We don't have much time left.
Yeah. So it's about action
SDG
now.
6, and if we fail on fulfilling SDG 6,
Right. Okay.
everything else
Yeah.
would fail.
Yeah. I want to thank the both of you so much. I was writing along in the session, but I think at the very core of it, there are a couple of virtues that we can all work on and we can all amplify in our life. It's about openness, a certain level of humility there as well, understanding, curiosity, wanting to hear the other perspective, because indeed, we're not going to be able to close that gap without a diversity of narratives there. And the both of you are ever so wonderfully contributing to that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. We'll be back with you shortly with a new talk show. Sorry.